Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with the Dean. Our guest today is David A. Sampson, the Honorable David A. Sampson. David today is the CEO of the Property and Casualty Insurers Association of America, but in a former life, he was the Deputy Secretary of Commerce in the Bush administration. David, welcome back to Lipscomb.
Thanks, Tony. Privileged to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. We honored you today as a hero of business, and you are a 1978 alum of Lipscomb.
That's right.
So it's a privilege to have you back on the campus.
Well, things have changed a lot over the decades, but I think that it's very impressive to see all the progress that's been made, the vibrancy of the campus, the programs that have been added, and the quality of the students. I really enjoy the opportunity this morning to interact with the students.
Well, it was a privilege to have you back, and I guess I'll start with your service to George W. Bush. You served President Bush, then Governor Bush, while he was governor of the state of Texas. Mm-hmm. You went with him to Washington, D.C. and served him in two separate capacities. Most recently, the last position was as the Deputy Secretary of Commerce, effectively the Chief Operating Officer of the entire department. What was it like working for George W. Bush?
Well, he's a man of great integrity. I think that's the first thing that stands out for anyone who has been around him for any period of time. I had the opportunity of knowing or working with him now since about 1991, so that's quite some period of time, and I think that he's a person of tremendous focus. When he ran for governor of Texas, it was with a clear focus to improve education and improve the tort environment and the economic environment of Texas, and that's borne fruit. He stayed focused on those agenda items, and those have really borne fruit in Texas for many, many years. Integrity, focus. He's a very quick study. He's someone who understands the heart of the issue and gets to the heart of the issue. He's someone who always promoted very vigorous dialogue among his advisors and the officials. I think that's one of the great myths that was out there, that he surrounded himself with with people who all thought alike, and really, I think the record is now bearing out the fact that that's completely the opposite of the environment that it was. If you look at the new books that have come out by Secretary Rumsfeld and now Vice President Cheney's book, you can see within that book that there was a lot of robust dialogue and discussion about what policy direction should the administration take on a whole range of issues. He's a decisive person once he believed that he had all of the information that he needed to set a clear course and direction for the country, and a man of faith, deep faith, and someone who was very, very loyal to all of those who worked around him.
Now, David, that is a decidedly different picture than emerged from the media characterizations of George W. Bush. So why do you think he was so maligned and so misrepresented to the public?
Well, I think to be fair, it probably happens on both sides of the aisle. I don't think that President Bush is the first president to be caricatured in that way. I think that some of it is a part of the political environment in which we live today, but I would remind folks that there's always been some element of that in American history. If you go back to very early in the nation's history and some of the bitter debates that existed between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and politics was a pretty rough and tumble sport in the early days of the nation, and I think we have somewhat idealized our past because we see the founding fathers all around, the tables and their portraits and everything. But it was a very rough and tumble world then. So some of that, I think, is just the nature of the political process. With President Bush, I think that a lot of it grew out of the very controversial and disputed 2000 election and the way that unfolded. I think that regardless of whatever events transpired after that, he would have been polarizing among some segments of the community. But I think that given the really epic nature of the events that hit the country during his presidency and some of the fundamental policy calls that he had to make, we were exploring, he was exploring new paths for the country and defending itself that we had not had to deal with before. And so I think that some of it is the nature of the times. And I would point out, however, that the current administration, in terms of the national security measures, has continued virtually all of those very controversial policies that were the subject of so much debate, that they have been continued by this administration, because I think in the end they proved to be sound, reasoned, consistent with our legal structure and our character as a nation, and policies that have proven to keep Americans safe.
Do you think in the end that George W. Bush will be considered to be a great president?
Well, I don't think anyone can know how history is going to unfold. I can tell you that he was quite confident to leave that judgment to history. I think he was focused on taking a strategic view of the challenges facing the nation, not just kicking the can down the road any longer, which has been a problem that we've had in the country in the last couple of decades, but really grappling with these fundamental issues and trying to set a strategic course for the country. And I think he was very confident in leaving that judgment to history. I know that he would always say they're still writing books about George Washington and trying to assess his impact on the nation as the first president. If they're still writing about him, all these years later, they'll probably be writing about this presidency. But I don't think he spent a lot of time worrying about the judgment of history. I think he was focused on making the best decisions he could with the information they had available in the current crisis, and that's what he encouraged his team to focus on.
Well, let me ask you about a couple of different situations, and you tell me if you think he would do these differently if he had it to do over again. For example, he was much maligned because of the accusation that he had lied to the public about the weapons of mass destruction. Do you think he would do that differently, or do you think that was mischaracterized to the public?
Well, I think clearly the characterization that the administration lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq is a falsehood. There weren't lies. The fact is, every Western intelligence service in the world believed that Saddam Hussein still had an active WMD program, including the U.S. intelligence agencies, the British, the French, the Israelis, Saddam Hussein's neighbors in the region, their strategic calculations. They believed that he had active WMD programs, and certainly Hussein did everything he could to perpetuate that. I think that if you read some of the books that have been written by his senior advisors since the end of the administration, I think Karl Rove has said that it probably was a strategic mistake not to rebut that charge more quickly and more forcefully. I think Vice President Cheney argues the same thing in his new book. I think at the time, though, there was an assessment that charge is so outrageous and so contrary to what all the facts that were known at the time that no one would give it credibility. But I think what we have learned now is that a charge like that, even though if it is based completely in whole cloth, becomes powerful if repeated often enough and not rebutted.
Well, let's move a little closer to your sphere of influence in business. Do you think he would run up the huge budget deficits again that happened during the Bush administration?
Well, I mean, I think that I think first of all, I would challenge the assumption that we ran up the huge budget deficits. I think if you look at domestic discretionary spending programs, those reduced year upon year during his administration, substantially from the last budget that President Clinton submitted to the budgets that he submitted. Now, clearly, there were some externalities that occurred during those early years. 9/11, the most significant of which required significant expenditures on protecting the homeland, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. But in terms of discretionary domestic spending, those numbers went down year upon year. Now, of course, when you get into the last fall of the administration, fall of 2008, with the financial crisis, and everyone believed that truly we were on the precipice of global financial collapse. There were a number of interventions that were taken that were very uncharacteristic for the president's governing philosophy, but that he took those decisions because he believed that the consequences of not acting truly was going to be a collapse of the entire global economic system.
You arrived in Washington, I think, to join the administration maybe just a couple of weeks before the 9/11.
Well, I actually got there much earlier
right?
after the inauguration. My family arrived
Okay.
a couple of weeks just before 9/11.
But you were clearly part of the administration when that tragedy occurred. And in fact, you told me earlier today that you were in Newark, just across the river from the World Trade Center, making a speech that morning. So you clearly had a spectator's view of what happened. It must have been a tragic circumstance.
Well, trying to figure
that
out
day.
what I was getting ready to give a speech. I never actually gave the speech because the mayor who was going to be introducing me at that remarks came in breathless and a little bit late, and well, we were in the holding room and indicated that there had been a plane hit the World Trade Center, and it was one of those. My assumption was it was a small plane, and I remember thinking, how in the world could somebody, fly into it? It was a beautiful day, clear skies, and then, very shortly thereafter, the second plane hit, and we then knew that there was something very much out of the ordinary. And so the team that I was traveling with, we immediately returned to the hotel that we were staying at and kind of bunkered down there for the rest of the day and began strategizing about how we could make it back to D.C. We couldn't get back that day, and finally one of our staff members had a relationship with a local Ford dealer and was able to rent a car, a van actually, and my staff and I drove back to Washington then the next day.
What did you think when you returned to Washington and you saw the Pentagon that had been attacked?
It was, I know everyone says that it was surreal, that it was like you're watching a movie unfold in front of you. But that really, it had a very surreal look and feel to the city. I mean, you had soldiers in armed Humvees on, the corners around the White House and around the Commerce Department building where I worked, with access blocked. You had anti-aircraft missiles surrounding the Pentagon very shortly thereafter. You have to remember that no one knew what else was in the works and what else might be coming. But I do remember that. Can't remember if it was Wednesday night or Thursday night. Those days tend to bleed over one into the other. But there was either Wednesday night or Thursday night, there was a candlelight vigil in front of the U.S. Capitol around the fountain there with just thousands of people. Nothing really organized. People quietly singing hymns, and it was one of those experiences that said, you're entering a new period of history. I think we all recognized that that one period of history had ended, and now we were entering a new period of history, and we didn't know what was going to unfold, but we knew it was going to be very, very different than everything that had come before that.
Very dramatic, very dramatic. One of the most dramatic moments, I think, in our lifetime.
In our lifetime,
yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's right. The day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated might be comparable to that, but certainly a very traumatic occasion. Now, your family had just arrived in Washington,
shortly
D.C.
before that. Yeah.
And your boys, your twin boys, I think, were about what, 8 or 9?
They were 8 years old at the time.
What was it like for 8-year-olds to watch that happen and to live in Washington, D.C.?
Well, it was very unsettling. I mean, I think that you have a couple of kids from Texas, number one, that moving to the D.C. area, and in the weekend before, the couple of weekends before 9/11, we had. I was trying to get them excited about the move, and of course we had gone driving around to the Pentagon and the Smithsonian and the Capitol and the White House, and so very shortly after that, they see the images on TV of the Pentagon burning and relatively short distance away from our house, and it was very, very unsettling. I think that they really struggled with it. I can remember them asking, well, how are they going to try to kill us? And that's the mind of an 8-year-old of not really recognizing the attacks on centers of financial or military power. It was, they perceived it as an attack on America and all citizens being vulnerable. And I think there was a kind of a childish wisdom in that, which maybe they perceived early on that it was an attack that was attempted to make all Americans feel vulnerable.
We tend to forget, at the distance of almost 10 years now, that not long after that occurred, the D.C. snipers were out and about for a period
next
of
fall.
several months. Yeah, and so it must have been as traumatic for a long period of time as it was initially when the first attack occurred.
I believe that occurred the next fall, and it was very disruptive to life in D.C. When school started, the first sniper attack began shortly after school started that fall, and all the scout activities, all the soccer teams, all of those events were canceled for the fall. Children would go to school and have to get out of the car and run into the school building while police stood at the entrance. Once you got to school, they were locked in, no recess, because you didn't know where the snipers were coming from. Gas stations. Some of the attacks, some of the shootings were people who were at gas stations filling up, and so gas stations began erecting tarps around the islands, around the gas pumps, the canopies, and so you would have to pull in through. You'd have to open up the canopy and pull your car in. So it was again one of those things that totally I guess unrelated to 9/11, but still I think that reinforced that uncertainty and that anxiety about nowhere being safe.
Sure. Well, as I recall, until those snipers were caught, no one knew for sure they weren't terrorists.
Well, yeah, that's right, and there was misinformation about everyone was looking for a white panel van, and so anytime you'd see a white paneled van driving through the neighborhood, everyone would get very nervous.
And you had white powder showing up in the mail service.
I think that was later in the fall after 9/11, I believe, and so, the mail system itself becomes something that is vulnerable, and the federal government had to create a whole new system for irradiating mail before it could be delivered to government offices. And of course, several congressional office buildings were closed for an extended period of time because of the anthrax powder.
So this was an incredible period of history, and you were a front row witness to unbelievable events. Do you plan to write a book?
I've never really thought about that. I'm not sure that I'm not sure I've got the discipline or the patience to write a book, but and certainly there will be others who were in a much better position to observe the whole situation that was unfolding that have written, and I think will continue to write about it. I think there are some books coming in. I think the President's own book, Decision Points, is a phenomenal book that identifies a number of these key issues and what was known at the time. And I think that this is one of the greatest challenges for business leaders is decision making in an era of uncertainty. I mean, that was a period of profound uncertainty. But I would submit that business leaders are facing the same kind of uncertainty today. It's an uncertainty that's brought about because we don't know what our economic policies are going to be going forward, the tax policies, the sovereign debt crisis, and how that's going to unfold. And yet, business leaders, still have to make decisions. And I think the President's book, Decision Points, talks about how you gather as much information as you can. You try to verify that it's accurate. You test the assumptions that you're working with. But at some point, you have to set a course, and that's true for every CEO in every company, whether you're going to take the risk to go ahead and expand, hire people, buy plant and equipment, or whether you're going to stay on the sidelines. And I think generally my observations in working with CEOs around the country is that CEOs are very risk averse today and are kind of holding back and seeing how some of this uncertainty plays out over the next year or so.
Tell us what the Deputy Secretary of Commerce does. What was your job description at Commerce?
Well, officially you are the Chief Operating Officer for the Cabinet agency, and you have to be in a position to stand in for the Secretary at events that the Secretary cannot be at. It's a vast portfolio, and obviously the Secretary can't be everywhere, and so the role of the deputy is to make sure that he or she is fully up to speed on all of the critical issues that face that portfolio and advise the Secretary on the courses of action that need to be taken and if need be, fill in for the Secretary. The deputies in the cabinet agencies, the way the policy development process works is you have lower level working groups made up of a combination of career staff as well as appointed political officials who work issues, and then those move up to what's called the Deputies Committee, and on virtually any issue there are going to be different equities and different perspectives among different cabinet agencies, and so the deputies then try to resolve those, and if the deputies are not able to resolve those, then those get bumped up to the what's called the Principals Committee, which is the Cabinet Secretary and the President. And so you try to work that policy development process to achieve a consensus among the agencies. And then the deputy is the Chief Operating Officer for the department to make sure the budgets are prepared, the personnel systems are followed. So it's a very challenging role.
You had a reputation in Washington, as I've done my homework on you, David, as a very challenging boss, but a boss that many, many people wanted to work for. What was your philosophy of leadership that caused people to want to work for you despite your demands?
Well, the conventional wisdom in D.C. was if you can work for Sampson and you can succeed in any environment, because it's an environment where I have very high yet achievable standards that I believe need to be set for myself and for the organization. I expect and demand loyalty. Now that doesn't mean that you surround yourself with yes people. Loyalty to me means that you have people that are confident enough in themselves and their abilities and are looking out for the strategic interest of the organization, that when they come to the table, they come with their very best judgment and thinking, and will vigorously advance that point of view with their colleagues around the table and before, so that I can hear all of those perspectives. Loyalty means being willing to speak up when something's not going right in the organization and bringing it to the attention of the leader. There's nothing more damaging for an organization. There are always going to be problems in an organization. There are always going to be things that go wrong.
Sure.
There are going to be unforced errors, and then there are going to be, in any human organization, there are going to be problems. There are going to be people who make mistakes. There are going to be people who try to game the system, and you have to rely on folks, to have folks around you who have good eyes, who are attuned to good values, who have good values. And loyalty means bringing that to the top instead of letting problems fester within the organization. And then, I try to create an environment where you encourage people to do what's right, fair, and honest all the time with everyone, and then you let the consequences take care of themselves. And so I think people like that environment. They like the clarity. I try to empower people. I always try to hire and recruit people who are a lot smarter and more talented than I am. Give them clear direction, turn them loose to accomplish their job, have regular check-ins, touch points, metrics along the way. But then the other thing that I always tried to do was to give the more junior staffers opportunities to present to senior officials within the administration, so that it wasn't always me doing the presentations, that you give other people the chance to showcase their talent and abilities. And I think people appreciated that, and I think that's why I had such great success in recruiting really talented people who've gone on to have great careers, both throughout that administration and in the private sector after the administration was over.
We're running out of time, so we don't have much time left, but let me ask you in closing, what lies ahead for David Sampson?
Well, my philosophy in life is to always try to stay focused on doing the very best job that I can in whatever sphere of responsibilities that I have, and then you let the future take care of itself. Look, there's no way that I could have scripted out my life and career when I came to Lipscomb in the fall of 1975. If I'd tried to write that as a script, it would have been laughed out of Hollywood. No one would have bought it, even as a fantasy or a fiction. And so I don't spend much time worrying about the future. I lead a great organization. Property casualty industry is a foundational industry for this economy. Nothing moves unless risk can be priced and offloaded. And so I work for a great organization, and my focus is doing the very best job to represent the industry that I work for.
Well, it's an honor to have you among the alums for Lipscomb University, David, and we were honored today to honor you.
Well,
and so we delight in calling you a hero of business.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you for returning to Lipscomb. Our guest today has been the Honorable David Sampson, who is today the CEO of the Property Casualty Insurers Association of America, and he's a former Deputy Secretary of Commerce of the United States government. Look forward to joining us again soon. Thanks for being with us.